We are Group 9. We're going to present on the international letters of credit. And we found a video that explains things pretty thoroughly. So we're going to start with that, and then we can get into it in our own words.
A letter of credit is a legal document from a bank or financial institution. It represents a promise to pay the holder if the holder fulfills certain obligations. Sellers in commercial transactions often require buyers to give them a letter of credit before they ship goods, because a bank then takes on the obligation of paying the seller, thus ensuring that the seller will be paid. Letters of credit, or LOCs, are often used when buyers and sellers do not know each other. They are especially common in international trade, when great distances and different languages, laws, and customs make it hard to know whether a buyer will pay. But they are also used in everyday domestic business. Banks require every word, name, date, and detail to be as specific and clear as possible. The slightest mistake can cause the bank to not pay and to require a new letter of credit. For example, shipping a day late or misspelling a name may cause the bank to not pay until a new letter of credit is created and accepted. It's also important to note that the bank pays the seller based strictly on the soundness of the LOC, with no regard for other factors such as the whereabouts of the actual goods or the buyer's satisfaction. Advantages of an LOC for the seller include reduced production risk in case the order is changed or canceled, and protection for the seller in case the buyer doesn't pay. Advantages of an LOC for the buyer include the buyer is certain to receive the goods stipulated in the letter of credit, and a letter of credit shows solvency for the buyer and allows them to reduce or eliminate an initial payment.
Okay, sweet. So just to put it in our own words, basically a letter of credit is a payment mechanism used in international trade that is intended as a payment guarantee for the exporter. So the payment the exporter receives actually comes from the bank. And just oftentimes in international trade, the buyer and the seller have never met, so it can be pretty difficult to determine if the other side is going to be reliable. But by using a letter of credit, you're allowing a bank to assume the risk so that you don't have to, and basically you're going to limit the uncertainty that comes along with international trade. And so this is important for international business because the United States is the largest economy in the world, and a majority of that comes from international trade. So when you're dealing with imports and exports, it's important to protect yourself from potentially being defrauded. And then laws in different countries can often range, and using an LC allows for a uniform payment process. And this also helps with mitigating different languages and different customs in different countries when you're importing and exporting. So I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Noah, and he's going to talk about the difficulties.
So letters of credit sometimes have difficulties, and one of these could be a mistake, could mean losing thousands or even millions for your company. Since LCs deals are on the level of international trade, most of the agreements are at high prices and high risk. If there's a mistake with the LC that a manager or financer does not catch, and the lawyer and the bank will sign off, there's a potential risk that may result in a loss of money if that mistake is caught on later. If the sales export manager signs off without understanding the risk and the complications, then this could lead to additional costs or delays resulting from discrepant documents. And then finally, another one is shipping and finance staff may also not pay attention to the details when preparing the documents. Another difficulty is getting a bank to work the beneficiary with no prior relationship is sometimes very hard to do. If a bank has no knowledge of your business or the specific field in which your business does, then there's sometimes little to no incentive for a bank to work with a company. Banks are extremely picky when dealing with signing a new business for letters of credit because a bank wants to see a healthy and sophisticated business where there's a steady stream of income and revenue so that they know they won't be losing their bank's money. Another difficulty is export control violations if not done correctly through the letter of credit. So two of these could be actual shipment or transportation of items outside of the US. If your letter of credit is not written correctly, and this does happen, you could be in violation. And another violation is release or disclosure, including verbal or visual of any controlled technology, software, or technical data in the US that could be deemed as an export. And then lastly, if you are caught with any violation or any of that, the penalties on the civil charges level. So from the Department of State, what would happen would be seizure and forfeiture of articles, revocation of exporting privileges, fines up to $500,000 per violation. Penalty through the Department of Commerce would mean loss of export privileges, fines up to $10,000 to $120,000 per violation, and then a penalty through Department of Treasury, fines could be at $12,000 to $55,000, depending on the applicable law per violation. So from here, we're now going to go to the benefits.
So when looking at international letters of credit and the benefits, you can separate them into three parties in every transaction. You've got the sellers, the buyers, and the banks. First, the benefits for the sellers. As a seller, your benefits include reducing the production risk if the buyer were to cancel or change the order. The payment is assured in the case of a disputable transaction. You will receive your payment immediately when the terms are fulfilled, and it allows for safer expansion internationally, and you are free of credit risk. And for the second group, the benefits for the buyers, it works as a credit certificate, which allows the buyer to engage in multiple transactions simultaneously. The buyer can also control the time period for the shipping of the goods, and finally, it allows the buyer to avoid or reduce prepayment. And finally, the benefits for the banks. It brings business in because there's no transaction that is too small. The Export-Import Bank helps reduce your risk by taking on the accounts for you, and banks receive a fee for every single transaction. Finally, we'll look at a real-life example. And in every party, there are four involved. There's a buyer, the issuing bank, which works with the buyer, the correspondent bank, and the correspondent bank works with a beneficiary or a seller. And in our example, we have Tom, who lives in the United States, and his bank is the Bank of America. We have Ram, who lives in India, and his bank would be the Bank of India. And Noah's going to finish out the example.
Step one would be the sales agreement. So on January 1st, Mr. Tom from the US agrees to buy goods worth $10,000 from Mr. Ram in India. During the negotiation, it was agreed that payment would be done in a commercial letter of credit. And then step two would be the opening instructions, in which Tom requests Bank of America to open a letter of credit of $10,000 in favor towards Mr. Ram. And then the Bank of America checks Mr. Tom's creditworthiness and completes the required formality to issue a letter of credit for this transaction. Step three is issuing a letter of credit. So a couple of days later, the Bank of America issues the requested letter of credit that expires in 90 days from the date of issue and forwards it to the corresponding bank, for example, Bank of India. The corresponding bank is usually located in the country in which the seller resides. In our example, it is India. Bank of India will authenticate the letter of credit and send it to Mr. Ram. It is necessary that Mr. Ram exports the good and submits the required documents before the expiry of letter of credit. If not, then the Bank of America will not oblige to pay for Mr. Tom if Mr. Tom doesn't. Step four is seller ships the goods and prepare documents. So a couple months later, Mr. Ram ships the goods to Mr. Tom and prepared the required shipping documents as per the instructions of the letter of credit. The usual documents required are commercial invoice, packing list, transport documents, and insurance policies. Some banks require additional documents, but these are necessary. Step five is document submission and verification. Mr. Ram submits the documents to the Bank of India. Bank of India checks all documents to confirm whether they are in compliance with the instructions of the letter of credit. Thereafter, the Bank of India sends the documents to Bank of America and asks for the payment. Step six is the confirmation and the payment. Bank of America again checks the documents for compliance, and if all the documents are in place, it debits Mr. Tom's account of $10,000 plus letter of credit fees and pays $10,000 to the Bank of India, who further deducts its own fees and deposits the remaining amount to in Mr. Ram's account. So that is our example of our letter of credit, and I hope you guys all enjoyed our presentation. Thank you so much.